What's up, viewers, subscribers, and agents alike? It's your boy, Luciferian Prince, coming at y'all once again. Coming at y'all. I want to speak on the note of my previous video, I should say. That's not me. That was a very controversial video that unfortunately has been taken down from numerous platforms, social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Fortunately for myself, I downloaded the video and I kept it in my personal archive for future references just in case they try to remove it. You know what I'm saying? Coming at y'all live with the old school Atlanta Hawk, man. It's the old school Atlanta Hawk, man. Old school package bag. You know what I'm saying? The old school. You know what I'm saying? Not that new shit. This video is going to be titled The Credit River Decision. The Credit River Decision was a very controversial decision in the late 60s, right about the time prior to the establishment of the public dissemination of knowledge about the Uniform Commercial Code, and how a lot of people weren't really aware of how this process applies, whatever the case may be, is what it is. I think that this is more of a very comprehensive video. It's very powerful. But it'd be very short, but it'd be very definitive, even at the least. So this right here is one of those decisions that actually boiled down to the Federal Reserve, national and state banks to be declared null and void. And this is actually something that actually helps people determining their financial status in regards to their process of their own personal liberality. So without further ado, let's read. I'm going to read this from a certain documentation. I don't put certain documentation online anymore because, you know, we have these opportunists who like to come steal things, you know what I'm saying, and come take these things with their own twist and spill on it. And to be honest with you, I don't condone that anymore. So I'll read from my personal archive. The information, particularly as we've spoken about on the video, you will have to contact me privately for that. And that's my direct right to my personal safety and my personal sanctity of mind, because hell, you know, yesteryear I would just put this stuff out there. But I realized that the naivety of that concept means that particularly these people, for the most part, they take it and monetize it for their own purposes. So that's insane. Long story short, comes now, blank, 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 natural living, flesh and blood man, peaceful American national of the land under oath, who states that the following information is of his own personal knowledge and belief. Almost 50 years ago, in 1968, in Credit River Township, Minnesota, the finding, commonly referred to as the Credit River Decision, of the landmark court case, First National Bank of Montgomery, Minnesota, versus Jerome Daly, held by the Federal Reserve Act to be unconstitutional and void. This decision, which is legally sound, declared in effect that all the private mortgages on real estate and personal property and all U.S. and state bonds held by the Federal Reserve, national and state banks to be null and void. This amounts to the emancipation of all Americans from personal, national, and state debt purportedly owed to the Federal Reserve Bank, that is. Every American owes it to himself, herself, his country or her country, and to the people of the world to study and understand this decision, for upon this decision hangs the question of freedom or slavery for the entire world, as far as the so-called socialistic construct we call the United States is. On May 8th, 1964, Mr. Jerome Daly executed a note and mortgage to the First National Bank of Montgomery, Minnesota, which is a member of the Federal Reserve National Bank of Minneapolis. Both banks are privately owned and are part of the Federal Reserve banking system. In the spring of 1967, Mr. Jerome Daly was in arrears of $476 in the payments on this note and mortgage. The note was secured by a mortgage on real property in Spring Lake Township in Scott County, Minnesota. The bank foreclosed by advertisement and bought the property at a sheriff sale held on June 26, go figure, that's my birthday, 1967. Mr. Jerome Daly made no further payments after June 26, 1967, and did not redeem within the 12-month time period allotted by law after the sheriff's sale. The bank brought an action to recover possession of the property to the Justice of the Peace Court at Savage, Minnesota. The first two justices were disqualified by affidavit of prejudice, the first by Mr. Daly, the second by the bank. And the third judge refused to handle the case. It was then sent pursuant to law to Martin versus Mahoney, Justice of the Peace, Credit River Township, Scott County, Minnesota, who presided at a jury trial on December 7, 1968. The jury found that the note and mortgage to be void for failure to give any validity to the share of sale. The verdict was for Mr. Daly with costs in the amount of $75. The acting president of the bank, Mr. Lawrence V. Morgan, admitted that the bank created this money and credit upon its books by which it acquired or gave as consideration for the note. That this was standard banking practice, that the credit first came into existence when they created it, that he knew of no United States statute which gave them the right to do so. And this is the universal practice of these banks, which are all institutions. Mr. Lawrence versus Morgan appeared at the trial December 7, 1968, and was perceived to be candid, open, direct, experienced, and truthful. He testified to 20 years of experience with the Bank of America in Los Angeles, the Marquette National Bank of Indianapolis, and the plaintiff in this case. He seemed to be familiar with the operations of the Federal Reserve System. The banker testified about the mortgage loan given to Mr. Daly, and then Mr. Jerome Daly cross-examined the banker about creating money out of thin air. Mr. Jerome Daly asked the bank president, if you were just opening up your bank and no one had yet made a deposit and I came into your bank and wanted to take out a loan of $18,000, could you loan me that money? When the banker, the president, said, yes, Mr. Jerome Daly asked, does this mean that if you can create money out of thin air? And the bank president said, yes, we can create money out of thin air. He freely admitted that his bank created all the money or credit upon his book with which it acquired the note and mortgage of May 8, 1964. The credit first came into existence when the bank created upon his books by a ledger entry. Further, he freely admitted that no United States law gave the bank the authority to do this. There was obviously no lawful consideration for it. For the note, the bank parted with absolutely nothing except paper and a little bit of ink. Justice Martin V. Mahoney then said, it sounds like fraud to me. And everybody in the courtroom nodded their heads, indicating that they agreed with Justice Martin V. Mahoney. No complaint was made of the banker that the bank did not receive a fair trial. Excuse me, that's Justice Martin V. Manning. Pardon me. From the admissions made by Mr. Lawrence versus Morgan, the path of duty was clearly made and was very direct and clear for the jury. Their verdict could not be reasonable, had it been otherwise. Justice was rendered completely and without denial, promptly and without delay, freely and without purchase, comfortable to the laws in this court on December 7, 1968. This was the first time the question has been passed in the United States. The decision is one of the great documentations of American history. It is a huge cornerstone wrenched from the temple of imperialism, one of the solid foundations of the so-called Stone of Liberty. The money kings that run the private federal bank, it appears, soon got back at Justice Martin V. Mahoney by poisoning him in what appeared to have been a fishing boat accident less than 6 months later. In June of 1969, the Credit River decision, as it is known, was and still is the most important legal decision ever decided by a jury of 12 men and women. You know, it's a very, very controversial decision. And the reason why it's a very controversial decision is because it's not in the interest of the so-called corporation. It's not in the interest of the private money interests. It's not in the interest of the so-called FDIC. It's not in the interest of the so-called benefactors who wish to rule and reign tyranny over your personal existence. It's not in their benefit. So, of course, unfortunately, Justice Martin V. Mahoney, I think he said Manny, and it was misenunciated in the publication, but it says Mahoney, by poisoning him in what appeared to have been a fishing boat accident less than 6 months later. Wow. Sometimes that's the power of the truth. And as I said before, I really won't go into detail, particularly about the documentation, whatever case may be. You can email me, particularly, because yes, it is a legal, actual instrument that you can use. But as far as just placing it out here on the so-called airwaves, I digress. And for good reason, because I said it before. The pack is back, baby. Pack is back. War machine is kicking, boy. Full gear. You know what I'm saying? Y'all go ahead and stay tuned, man. This channel gonna keep on rocking. You know what I'm saying? Peace. I love y'all. And agents, we found you out, biatch.